My name is Hans Johnson, and I am the director of PPIC's Higher Education Center. We're very happy that you're here with us today. For those of you who don't know, PPIC is a private, nonpartisan, not-for-profit policy research institution with offices here in Sacramento and in San Francisco. And congratulations to all of you who are at least the regular attendees of these events at PPIC for finding today's location. Usually we have it over across from the cathedral, but this is a great space with fantastic artwork, so we're happy to be here, and we'd like to thank the California Endowment for providing this space for us. So PPIC has just released a new report entitled Reforming English Pathways at California's Community Colleges. The authors are Marisol Cuellar Mejia, who you'll hear from in a minute, Olga Rodriguez, who will be moderating the panel session that follows Marisol's brief of the project, and Bonnie Brooks, who provided a tremendous amount of research support on this project. We'd like to explicitly thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the College of Futures Foundation, and the Sutton Family Fund for their support of this work and for providing today's lunch. You all have received a copy of the report on your chair. There are additional copies at the registration table to take back to your colleagues. The full report, along with the appendices and slides from today's presentation, are available at the PPIC website. You should also have received an agenda that includes speaker bios, and so in the interest of time, we'll only do brief introductions before our panel discussion that follows. Please note that we also have an online audience, so during the question and answer time, please wait for the microphone. That way our online audience can hear the question as well. Later today, you will receive a short survey via email, and please fill it out. That helps us tailor these briefings and improve them. And next week, on March 8th, we'll be back over at our regular site at the Capitol Event Center for a discussion on a new report we have on next generation science standards in California. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. And finally, please turn off and silence your cell phones. And so now I'd like to introduce Marisol Cuellar Mejia. She's a research associate at the Public Policy Institute of California in our Higher Education Center. And welcome, Marisol.
Good afternoon, everyone. The report that I'm about to present is the latest report on our ongoing research agenda on developmental education in California community colleges. In a recent report, we took a deep look at the reform efforts in developmental math. In this report, our goal is to provide a detailed description of the current landscape in developmental English, highlighting reform efforts underway. Before moving on, I would like to say thank you to the California Community College Chancellor's Office for providing us with access to the student level data. Without that data, this research will not be possible. Also, we want to thank the group of faculty that talk to us and provide us with very useful insight. As Hans mentioned, this is joint work by Olga Rodriguez, Hans Johnson, and Bonnie Brooks. So let me start by giving you a little bit of context. Developmental education is one of the largest barriers to student completion. In our previous research, we found that 80% of entering students in community colleges enroll in at least one developmental math, English, or both during the college journey. Latino, African American, and low-income students are disproportionately enrolled in developmental education. And let me give you a couple of very astonishing statistics from our prior research related to student outcomes in developmental education. We find that only 27% of students ever enroll in developmental math and 44% of students ever enroll in developmental English successfully complete a transfer level course in the same discipline within 6 years. And what is even worse, only 24% of those students transfer to a 4-year institution within 6 years. So the next question that you will ask is like, why are developmental education students lagging so far behind? And the answer to that question has to do mainly with long course sequences. And why? Because long course sequences create many exit points where the students can drop out. Another key factor in explaining the poor outcomes is the misalignment between the content of developmental education coursework and the college level coursework. So those are the two key factors that we have identified in our research. However, I want to say that not everything is bad news. We have also good news. There is a lot of reform efforts going on currently. These reforms can be grouped in two big piles. One set of reforms is aimed to promote consistent and accurate placement and assessment policies. And a second group of policies have to do with reforming the structure and organization of developmental course sequences. And those are the ones that we are going to be talking in detail during this presentation. I also want to say that in California, the legislature, the Chancellor's office, college officials, faculty groups, and researchers are all working together to make meaningful change to the developmental education. And the latest testament of these efforts is this, the signed into law of AB 705. And AB 705, it is a very good opportunity for change. Before I dig deeper in this presentation, I want to note, I want to make an important clarification. What we mean here by developmental English is any credit course, even reading, writing, or integrated reading and writing, that is a prerequisite in order to access a college composition. So here we're not talking about non-credit courses or adult education, are only courses that are going to be needed to access college level courses. And what you see in this slide is what, until not so long ago, this is what developmental English sequence would look like in most of our community colleges. So what we see here is those sequences were composed by separate reading and writing courses. So in the example that we have here in a college that offers 3 levels, this will mean 3 semesters and at least 6 courses of developmental coursework before students can access college composition. In terms of pedagogy, those courses were focused on mastering individual skills, discrete skills. There was not really never a connection between what the students were learning in the developmental course and how they can use those skills later on in other courses. The good news is that, fortunately, most colleges have moved away from this structure. We only have that 22 colleges out of the 114 still offer the traditional developmental sequence. Now, in this slide, there is a lot of information in this slide, so I'm going to spend a good amount of time in this. This slide, what is showing us like the different ways in which colleges are reforming the developmental English structure to make developmental education more conducive of student success and accelerate student progress towards college level coursework. So as we move, like if you look at the left side of the slide, we see less ambitious reforms. These reforms only, even though they shorten the amount of courses that the students need to take, or reduce the number that the courses that the students need to take in order to access college composition, still we're talking about 3 semesters of developmental coursework. But as we move to the right, we see more ambitious reforms. So let me just very quickly go through each one of these pathways. So in the first pathway that we see is colleges, a group of colleges have started to only offer sequence composed by writing courses. So they eliminate any standalone reading courses as a prerequisite to access college composition. Again, this reform reduced the number of courses, but there is not, in the majority of cases, there is not really course redesigned or anything. Then a next group of colleges have started to offer integrated reading and writing courses. And colleges are doing that in 2 different ways. Some colleges offer the integrated reading and writing course at only one level of their sequences, so they mix a standalone reading and writing courses with the integrated course. Another set of colleges have implemented integrated reading and writing instruction in every level of their existing sequence. Now let's move on to another group of colleges have implemented more ambitious reforms. And we have like two different models for that, so what we call accelerated pathways. So in the first path, we have that students have access to a very highly intensive developmental course, but to be able to access to that course, students need to take a prerequisite, which is usually a lower level reading or writing course. Another group of colleges have made that course open access and created what we call one semester acceleration. So that means that the students only need to take one semester of developmental work before they are able to access college composition. Finally, even more ambitious group of colleges have started to implement what is called co-requisite remediation. So that eliminates standalone developmental education, and students are granted access to college composition, but with academic support. And in the report, you can find the exact number of colleges that belong to each one of those categories, which I think that is very interesting information. I think the main takeaway from this slide is that developmental English is a structure very different from college to college. So the experience that a student gets from developmental English really depends on the college that the student attends. And there is also very big difference even within colleges, even in colleges within the same college district. And also, I think something that I didn't mention that I think is important, the majority of colleges offer more than one pathway to college composition. So even if a college is offering one semester acceleration, they are still also offering an alternative pathway that is a multi-level sequence. So there are two main directions that colleges are heading right now. One is accelerated pathways, and the other is co-requisite remediation. So let me just start by talking a little bit, giving you a little bit of details about accelerated pathways. And I already mentioned we find two different models. In one model, students are required to take a prerequisite before accessing the accelerated course. And in other courses, there is open access. So any student placed into developmental education, regardless of the level where the student was placed at, can enroll in that accelerated course. These accelerated pathways often entail structural, curricular, and pedagogical reforms. In terms of a structure, accelerated pathways reduce significantly the number of exit points. In terms of curriculum and pedagogical reforms, accelerated pathways or accelerated courses often integrate reading, writing, and critical thinking. Also, these courses are usually designed using backward design from the college level course. That means that students are going to be learning the content, the way, and the skills that they need in their college composition course. Well, this graph shows that the number of colleges offering accelerated pathways is increasing rapidly. In academic year 2016-17, our research found that 43 colleges are offering an accelerated pathway, and enrollment in those courses reach about like 21,000 students. And even though that's only 12.7% of all students enrolled in developmental education, it's still very low scale, but the growth has been rapidly during the last couple of years. In fact, in the last couple of years, enrollment doubled as 12 more colleges start offering this reform. And again, keep in mind that low scale and colleges, most colleges that are implementers of this reform still also offer the multi-level sequences. Now let's move on to one of the main findings of this report. And these figures show us that students enrolled in accelerated pathways are more likely to successfully complete college composition within 2 years. So we have that students in one semester acceleration or low acceleration pathways are 42%. 42% of those students are going to complete successfully college composition within 2 years, relative to 27% and 14% among those who started in a multi-level sequence 2 and 3 levels below transfer level. So there we see significantly improvements in outcomes. And one thing that I want to mention, these results don't control for academic ability of the students, because unfortunately we don't have information about high school grades, or we don't have information really about the assessment of the students. However, we control for a very rich set of demographic, economic, and educational characteristics of the students to see if what we are seeing here is really the main factor has to do with the change in the pathway, or has to do with better students enrolled in accelerated pathways. And after we do our analysis, we found that the results holds. Now, the next question that you may ask is, do all types of students see good results from acceleration, different types of students? And this figure gives you the answer, is every single ethnic and race and ethnic group see improvement in their likelihood of completing college composition between 2 years. However, we still see that equity gaps persist. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. And one thing that I want to highlight is that we see equity gaps in terms of outcomes, but we don't see equity gaps in terms of access to these reform pathways. So that's, which is a good result. So, okay, we talk about the one direction, which is accelerated pathways. The other direction is corrective remediation. And you will say, like, why we need another approach if you are showing me that accelerated pathways give, the students are getting much better outcomes, because still less than half of students actually go on and succeed in college composition. And this is relative, I mean, this is bad if you compare with 77% and more students who were never enrolled in developmental education. So, which I think that's the comparison that matters. So, corrective remediation is emerging as a promising approach, mostly based on evidence from other states, which show bigger gains from a corrective remediation than what we find from one semester acceleration. However, California community colleges have started to implement this reform, but for academic year 2016-17, we only find 8 colleges offering corrective remediation in English, with a combined enrollment of about 2,500 students. So the scale is still very low, but we expect those numbers to grow significantly. We know about 7 additional colleges that started to offer corrective remediation in academic year 2017-18. We know about another set of 4 colleges that are also in process of implementing this reform. And also, ongoing PPIC research agenda is we are working on contributing to the body of literature assessing the effectiveness of corrective remediation, because I think we still need more evidence for our state, and we are working on that. Finally, I just want to give just a few remarks that are also going to hopefully be touched upon on our panel discussion. Is we saw there is a great opportunity with these reforms. However, the scale is still very low. In most colleges, continue to offer these multi-level sequences. So most students are still going through the multi-level sequences that we know have very poor student outcomes. From our conversations with faculty, we learned that in order to implement successfully these reforms and also continue improving these reform efforts, professional developmental is key. We see that there are all students perform better in accelerated pathways. However, equity gaps persist. So reducing equity gaps should be a main consideration when we think about scaling up efforts. Finally, AB 705, which is thought mostly as an assessment and placement reform, it also provides a tremendous opportunity for adopting and scaling up these type of reforms. So with this, I conclude my presentation. I would like to invite my colleague Olga Rodriguez and our group of panelists for what is said to be a very engaged panel discussion. Thank you very much. And before, I also want to say that after the debate, we will be happy to answer any questions related to the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisol and Hans, for the excellent presentation and introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Olga Rodriguez, Research Fellow at the PPIC's Higher Education Center. And we're really happy that you're joining us here today. We have an expert panel to discuss our report and talk about the future of developmental education reform in California. To my left, I have Laura Hope. She's Executive Vice Chancellor for Educational Services at the California Community College System Office. She's responsible for overseeing the academic affairs as well as student services and special programs. And prior to joining the Chancellor's office, she was also a faculty member and an administrator at Jacqui College. In the middle, we have Assemblywoman Jacqui Irwin. She's a member of the California State Assembly representing the 44th District. And she also spearheaded AB 705, which Marisol mentioned, which has been critical in helping move forward with the reform efforts at the community college system. We also have Summer Serpas. She is the Assistant Director of the California Acceleration Project, and she's also an English instructor at Irvine Valley College. As Assistant Director in CAP, she's in charge of professional development efforts to help colleges improve the developmental education reform efforts at their system. So as you can see, our panelists represent 3 key policy and practice areas. So we're really excited to have the perspective from the legislature, from the system office, and from college and faculty themselves. So my role here is to help guide the discussion. We'll also have an opportunity to have question and answer. And when we get to that point, I just asked for you to wait for the microphone. Like Hans said, we're live streaming this event. So we'd like all our audience, both in person and live and online, to be able to engage in this discussion as well. So to begin, I'd like our panelists to reflect a little about the important role the state and colleges play in developmental English reform efforts. So we'll start with the Assemblymember Irwin. From your perspective as a legislature and champion of AB 705, can you tell us a little bit more about what you see as the primary role of the legislative mandates on developmental education reform efforts?
Yes, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I think it's a very delicate balance between mandating something statewide and letting local jurisdictions decide for themselves what they want to do. Certainly, I really do believe in local control, and the state needs to have a reason to step in. With AB 770, we worked with the Chancellor's office to set reform guidelines for colleges to adopt in order to receive grant funding, and we saw that some of the colleges adopted evidence-based practices such as accelerated courses and co-requisite models, which improve student success rates, but other colleges didn't use the funding in ways that led to reforms the reforms that we had envisioned, and didn't lead to more students graduating. So with 705, we wanted to give the colleges and the Chancellor's office flexibility as well, but with clear requirements that colleges use the best of multiple measures, including high school performance in placing students. With other parts of the bill, such as maximizing the probability that students pass a transfer level course within a year. We understood that there were 114 different colleges, and there would be different routes for each of them to the same goal. So we wanted to let the experts at the ground level determine what would work best with that. I believe that in my role as a state legislator, that it's not only about passing bills, but also following through with the implementation. It's really exciting to get those bills signed by the governor, but it's very important to have oversight after. I was disappointed, but not necessarily surprised to hear a faculty member mentioned in the reports that they just wish that AB 705 would go away. It's easy to feel that the hard work has been done once a bill is signed, but we need to follow through, and I'm thankful that the Chancellor's office has put together an implementation team for 705, and we will continue to monitor bills that I've authored, especially the ones affecting the millions of students in our community college system. Moving forward, I would generally like to say I don't want to be too prescriptive in telling colleges what to do, but we are starting to see more proven practices across many colleges that show that they can lead to better outcomes from students, and that is really our ultimate goal. So we want to give the colleges flexibility, and we want to make sure that we get the results that we know are possible.
Great. And from Summer and Laura, so she mentioned kind of the implementation challenges that may come about as a result of this mandate or the law. So drawing from your experience working with colleges and at the state level, can you tell us a little bit more about what do you see as some of the main challenges as colleges begin to adopt and implement the new law, and what can be done at both the college and system level to help address and help colleges with implementation challenges?
Want me to start? So at the system level, I think one of the challenges that we have, as was mentioned by Assemblymember Irwin, we have 114 different campuses with 115 microclimates within those 114 colleges. And often we function as more of a loose confederation of states rather than a system. And so given the fact that there is this level of sometimes incongruity or individualization on campuses, I think one of the things that we're responsible for doing is providing, first of all, the support that's required for the professional development that's going to be necessary in order for implementation to take place, which is why it's very important that we engage our faculty partners in that work. Our faculty partners through the California Acceleration Project, through 3CSN, through English organizations, every organization that we can support toward moving in the direction of these practices, we obviously want to try to do that to accelerate the implementation of the work. A more challenging aspect, though, of implementation is the paradigm shift required in thinking about student capacity. You may recall that in 2007, there was a lot of work done around the Basic Skills Initiative, in which that was really the first time the state had delved into the notion of evidence-based practices around instruction and student support. But in lots of ways, those reforms were treated as cafeteria models in which they were all sort of presented as equal. And I think one of the things that we know is that not all practices are going to give equal impact. And so, as was explained by Marisol, the impact practice that we've been looking at in terms of acceleration is one of those higher impact practices. It's not just a matter of changing placement. It's also about changing minds and hearts, about student capacity and the belief that they don't come to us just a jumble of deficits, that they come to us as fully formed adults who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill, a lot of opportunity that we need to try to amplify and activate. And so the curriculum that is being discussed within the California Acceleration Project, but other reformers as well, is about shifting that mindset away from fixing students into activating students. And so that mindset shift is probably the biggest challenge, because many of us have grown up in a system that is very much focused on the deficit model and have built careers around deficit models. And the idea that somehow we're going to elevate students into transfer level opportunities with high levels of support is very scary for well-intentioned faculty who care about students as well. But at the same time, making that leap is a big challenge. So I think implementation from a system perspective is going to require a considerable amount of professional learning that we can help to support and amplify so that faculty can become more comfortable with that paradigm shift. And I'm sure that Summer can talk about that more specifically than I can.
Yeah, I think we've done several professional development events in CAP since AB 705 has passed, and we've noticed that people can kind of get there in understanding the reasoning behind the bill. When we talk about the research and we provide examples, they can see why we're making these changes, and that's an important first step to really understand that. Then we start to get into, well, how do we do it, right? And things like, I hear a lot of colleges talking about the technical challenges, like how do we enroll students in a co-requisite class? How do we automate multiple measures for placement? What do we use for our course outline of record? Will this articulate? So all of those very technical things come into play, and that's a really challenging, time-consuming effort, even when you believe in the reforms. So that really technical part is difficult. And then, as you said, really support for teaching in this environment. I think for so long, we've put students in so many layers of remediation that the students who made it to transfer level were a very curated group of students. We had this very small group of survivors who made it all the way through our sequence, or the very little sliver who were allowed into transfer level through our placement mechanisms. So teachers who have traditionally only taught transfer level have been seeing this very different population of students. So when we let more students in, it's not that we're letting in students who aren't prepared. These students are capable of doing the work, doing the writing, but they come in with things like they need support for what we call like studenting skills, right? They may not do the reading in the beginning of the semester, and you're going to have to work with them to get on board with that. You're teaching them, to be a college student, and that used to happen mostly in basic skills, and now that's going to happen in transfer level. And again, that doesn't mean they can't do the work. It just means that the teachers in those classrooms need to be aware of those things, and when they pop up, they need to know how to support them. How do you help a student get back on track? How do you address fear in the classroom, students who are afraid of writing? How do you help students with their basic needs, students who have food insecurity and those kinds of things that used to get pushed all into our basic skills classes? So I think helping teachers who are now teaching this population be aware that those things don't mean a student can't be successful, but they do need to be supported in order for a student to be successful. So I think working with the colleges, like the 8 you said, who have already adopted the co-requisite model, and colleges that have adopted one semester acceleration that have these techniques in place is going to be critically important as we implement these changes.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So thinking about, keeping in mind kind of this reform landscape, we have AB 705, bringing it back to our 3 of our main findings, that the developmental education pathways vary significantly for English across the state, that one semester acceleration improves student outcomes compared to traditional sequences, and that there's promising evidence for co-requisites emerging from other states and starting to come out in California as well. In light of these findings and the changing landscape, I would like to ask the panel to reflect on how do you envision developmental education in, say, the next 5 years? Will we continue to see this wide variation? Do you envision one or more of these approaches to be more widely adopted across the state? If you guys can reflect and share your thoughts on that. And start.
I start? Okay. I think reading this report, it's amazing to see how far we've come in 10 years. But as I understand it, with AB 705, we are going to be changing what is allowable in terms of remediation. So I think we are going to be moving toward a system that allows more, if not all, students access to transfer level classes, and the variation is going to come in how we do that on individual campuses. How do we offer that support in terms of co-requisite? Do we attach a lab to it? Do we have a larger unit class? All of these different models that provide the support that students need. You know, and as we saw in the report, it's such an astounding statistic that we've worked so hard on this change, and still less than half of these developmental education students make it to transfer level. And we have a long-standing saying in CAP, we always say, it's not good enough. We've been doing all of this work, but that is not an acceptable number. We can't be happy with less than half of students. So I think, you know, as we move forward, we hopefully with AB 705 will see more of those co-requisite models that are showing really promising results. We work a lot with San Diego Mesa, and they have what we would call virtually open access co-requisite. A very small sliver of students would not be allowed access, but almost all will. And they have a 74% pass rate in that class. And so when you see these reforms at San Diego Mesa, we've worked with Solano, Sacramento City, most of the students are seeing between a 70 to 80% success rate in those co-requisite courses. So we are seeing nearly double the success rate than when we put them in one semester acceleration. So I think moving forward, you know, that's really what's going to be the game changer for students, is just letting them into the transfer level class, but not just dropping them in and hoping that they survive, but providing the support that they need to be successful.
So I would say from a systems view, one of the things that we've had the opportunity to do is visit a number of the colleges who have been exploring these reforms and are really on the front edge of a lot of these reform efforts. And I think one of the aspects of AB 705 that's so essential is that notion of the support kind of sidecar. Everybody tends to focus on the placement piece because that's the one that's so, I think, scary for a lot of people. But the placement change doesn't mean much if you haven't also developed that rich support mechanism. So I think what we're likely to see is more diversity among the support structures that colleges build. And I would hope a lot of creativity around that. I think one of the things we've heard from the CAP colleges and other progressive English departments is that there's a frontier around academic support that has not yet been tapped. People tend to think very traditionally about tutoring and peer-to-peer kinds of support, which I think offer a lot of promise. But there are also ways of thinking about the faculty-to-student support and the peer support within the class that I think offer a lot of promise that could be leveraged and really amplify our student success. I would like to think, too, that guided pathways will have an impact on what we see in the developmental English offerings, more contextualized teaching and learning that engages learners not only in the fundamental skills that they need to learn in order to be successful as transfer students, but also is going to have some relationship to the ultimate goal that they have in terms of their program of study. We also see that those practices have a tremendous amount of promise because students see the relevance of what they're doing in class, and they're also able to situate themselves a little bit better in the future in terms of thinking about the things that they want to do. And that has a tremendous impact on the capacity of students to stay motivated toward the completion of their goals. So I think more contextualized teaching and learning is likely to be something that we see. And I think also we're likely to see more significant shifts in the way that developmental education courses and the way transfer courses that used to be thought of as developmental education in terms of those sidecars, I think the educational practices are likely to change. The teachers that I've heard and the students that I've heard have told the most amazing stories about how these reforms have the capacity to reinvigorate people's careers and get them in touch with why they started teaching to begin with. When you stop teaching the apostrophe, a whole new world is possible when you look at the human beings in front of you and start leveraging their hopes and dreams. So I think in terms of changing teaching practice, what we've seen is teachers engaging more authentic reading material, connecting with their colleagues in other disciplines. We've seen excitement among those teachers about sharing the different things that they try. And of course, when they prototype some of these options, they crash and burn. But the greatest thing about teaching is that you've got the opportunity to collaborate with other professionals, engage their expertise, and rethink anew with people who are depending on you. And so I think there are a lot of changes ahead for teachers, and we look forward to supporting those efforts.
Great, thank you so much. And my apologies for those of you in the room who may not be as familiar with AB 705. I want to invite Assemblywoman Jacqui Irwin to tell us a little more, if she could tell us exactly what is mandated of community colleges from the AB 705.
Certainly. Well, just to sort of simplify it, we always use the example. Many students in my district, I have Oxnard Community College and Ventura and Moore Park, are being placed in remedial classes. And when we looked at it, it turns out it's because they're taking a placement test in the middle of the summer. They've probably been surfing, not really paying attention to what was coming up. They come and take this placement test, and then they end up in a remedial class that they might be having to take for the next 3 semesters. So basically, the bottom line of 705 is using multiple measures to determine college placement. So the best of multiple measures, whether it's the placement test or it's the SAT or it's grades in high school or classes that have been finished. And we've seen through piloted programs that high school performance is a much better indicator of college success.
Great, thank you so much. So next I'd like to talk a little bit more about the findings we have on equity in our report. So we, as Marisol highlighted, we find that all students improve their outcomes when we look at acceleration, one-term acceleration. However, we still see gaps amongst the groups. So I'd like to ask our panel to discuss what can faculty, colleges, the system office, and legislature do to help address some of these persistent gaps. So we can start with Laura.
So I think one of the things that's really clear from the vision for success that Chancellor Oakley is really driving is that we need to be paying attention not just to skills, but to the whole student. And so one of the things that we know is that students thrive in a situation of both high expectations and high levels of support. And often our students who are the most disadvantaged, either because they're low income or because they've experienced a level of institutional racism in their K-12 experience, they come to us with a whole host of issues that we need to figure out how to engineer within our colleges a level of support that's a little more sophisticated than just tutoring or the things that we've done to support academic skills. So one thing I think that we all know that we need to do is focus on equity more intently and more intentionally. For many years, equity has been sort of an afterthought. It's sort of like all of these things, and equity. And I think from the Chancellor's Office perspective, equity is one of our leading indicators, one of our leading goals, one of our primary focus areas, because those students deserve our support and our help, and also because California needs it. So one thing I think that we bring to that conversation is a more intense and intentional focus on equity and the challenges associated with supporting students so that we can get beyond those kinds of stubborn equity gaps. I think another area that we know that we need to bring together are those more holistic services that go along with academic support. You know, many of our students are experiencing food and housing insecurity. We're trying to change some financial aid policy so that more of our students get the kind of help that they need. Many of our students are working parents and need a lot of support around the support of their families. So a more holistic view of how colleges can be engineered to support students throughout their journey is one of the things that we're very interested in. We've got an upcoming summit actually in April on basic needs. Because if we can't support our students with some of those efforts, then a lot of things that we do in the classroom, however innovative they are never going to have the kind of outcomes that we want them to have.
Great.
So I would say there's a huge focus in the legislature on the equity gap, and it probably starts with preschool, that if you have students that are not getting the right type of preschool experience, that they're going to be starting behind the starting line when they start kindergarten. So we've expanded preschool spots last year in the legislature. The governor a few years ago implemented LCFF, where you are ending up with schools that have more vulnerable populations getting a much larger portion of funding. And it's very important that we follow up on that and make sure that they are using the money in a way that increases student outcomes. When you look at the college level, what we can do at the college level, I think increasing access to transfer level courses is key to closing the equity gap. We've seen, and this is from the PPIC report, that these classes in 2016, 87% of Latino and African American students were enrolling in developmental education. And we've also seen how increased access to transfer level courses leads to similar rates of success across races and ethnicities. 705 should help more students gain access to these classes so they can transfer and earn a degree. And my colleagues have also introduced a number of bills, passed legislation on some of the issues that you are talking about related to student hunger, immigration status. Last year, we passed legislation for a free first year of community college, and those are all items that will help address the income gap. We need to, in addition, look at data when analyzing the effects of closing these gaps. And this year, I have a bill, 1805, which will require colleges to post placement results, such as number and percentage of students that are placed into transfer level courses by race and ethnicity. So we need to identify which students are entering or not entering these classes and why, and then work with stakeholders to find solutions.
Yeah, I think as Assemblymember Irwin stated, the structure is the first thing that has to change, because we can do all we want with pedagogy and support, but if we put a student 3 levels below because of all of the exit points, they're far less likely to ever pass that transfer level class. And so AB 705 will address a lot of this through that structural change. We're seeing a lot of promise with co-requisite. I just was working with some instructors from Sacramento City, and in their co-requisite course, they're seeing equal pass rates for African American students compared to all students, around 80%. So that's very promising to see that when we let students who would have gone into these lower levels right into transfer level, they're passing at equal rates. And that's also because, you know, Sacramento City has the Emoja program. They have a lot of supports in place. They have, you know, good community building in the classroom, good pedagogy, good support for students outside of the classroom. So when we change the structure, we also, as we said earlier, have to work on that pedagogy and helping faculty across campus, including in the transfer level classes, help connect those students to the supports that they need. As Laura said earlier, all of those kind of basic needs of students really get in the way of their learning. If they are food insecure or housing insecure, that's going to become a problem in the classroom. And so I think really a mix of pedagogy that allows students to sometimes struggle for a bit. I always tell my students when I teach the 1 level below, you don't have to be ready for the transfer level when you walk in the door. You have to be ready when you walk out the door. So my first assignment is worth 0% because we're just practicing. We're just trying things out. So moving some of those practices into the transfer level class where students can struggle, recover, get connected to support, and get back on track. Instead of when they struggle, we just say, well, you're probably not going to pass, so you should drop. That's not something that should ever happen to a student. They should always be able to work through and turn it around. And then coupling that with helping them support their basic needs. I think, you know, the structure, the pedagogy, and the support for basic needs are all going to have to come together.
Great. This my last question structured for the panel is it often comes up that when we talk about the high remediation rates in community colleges, is what's the role of high schools in the whole preparing students for college success? So we'll start with Assemblymember Irwin. As we move forward with AB 705, where high school records will be used to guide the placement of students into math and English courses. What do you see as the role of high schools playing in this new environment?
Well, as I mentioned before, that I think these changes to college level courses are crucial, but I think for further reform, we do need to look at our K-12 system and make sure that our high school students are prepared before they apply for college. The report finds that despite improvements in completing college composition, 58% of the students who need extra support are still not completing the course, while 77% of students that are placed directly in composition are passing. We should determine if there are changes that we can make to the local control funding formula and make sure that we can compare metrics across different schools on the new school dashboard. So we've worked with the County Department of Education, and as most of you probably know, each school had determined for itself where they wanted to invest their additional funding, but we still haven't really gotten good results back, and the dashboard should really, the dashboard which we are starting to utilize really has the potential to dig down into schools that need the most help, and we can see where the state can exist. The budget this year proposes $70 million for the county offices of education and the California Collaboration of Educational Excellence and Agency to help the county offices and districts improve student outcomes to advance a support system for struggling schools. And I hope that our K-12 will use this money in a responsible way to get students ready for the classes that they need to take in college. Yeah, so just a little background, the governor's proposed budget includes $3.1 billion to fully fund LCFF this year, and additional $1.8 billion in one-time funds for schools, bringing the total per student average spending from all sources to $16,000, which is incredible, an incredible change from a few years ago. So if we can combine adequate preparation of our high school students with basic skills reform at the college level, I'm hopeful that we'll see thousands of more students every year accessing transfer level courses faster and completing their degrees to enter the workforce, and that is critically required for the future of California.
Summer, from your role in where you sit at the college, what role do you see your local high schools playing in kind of these reform efforts as we move forward?
I think a lot of the evidence shows that our high schools are preparing our students, and we've been using these wildly inaccurate placement tests to place our students, and we know that they aren't predicting their ability to succeed, and they take these tests and they say they're not ready, but the test isn't a good mechanism to say if they're ready or not. And with these schools that are letting them into transfer level classes, these students are passing these classes, the same students that we put in 3 levels below a few years ago. So, I think the majority of students who graduate from high school can go right into a transfer level class and can be successful. And those that need a little more support, we can provide that during the taking of the transfer level course. So I think we have a long history of finger pointing to the other segment. We say it's the high schools, the 4 years say it's the community colleges, and we like to blame everybody else. And in CAP, we're really trying to focus on our own structures and what we can do in the community college to support the students as they come to us from high school.
So I would agree with everything that both of the other panelists have addressed. I guess the only thing that I would add is that we can, in the community college, can always be better partners to our K through 12 partners in creating a through line, in making sure there's alignment within the systems. Most community college instructors don't know that much about the Common Core standards, and that's an area where our system can provide additional support. I think the other thing is working with our partners to assure that we help to expand the notion that every one of their high school students is potentially one of our college students. Rather than waiting for that to happen at the point of graduation. One of the things that is kind of interesting, at the college I used to work at, my son's high school was right next door. And I used to go to the back to school nights and all of the events that typically happen at the high school. Not once did I go to a high school event where the community college that was less than 200 yards from their fence was ever discussed at a single high school event. And so in lots of ways, it's sort of viewed or framed as community college is not presented as an option in terms of the future of our students. And we need to create that as an option for every one of our students, even our students who are probably UC and CSU bound, as we think about, you know, them planning their whole financial trajectory and everything else. I think we've also seen that improvements in more students taking the A through G requirements has resulted in the kinds of preparation that Summer was speaking to. We'd also like to see our high school partners, more of them require a 4th year of mathematics, which also has tremendous impact, even though our focus is on English today. A 4th year of mathematics is certainly one of the things that we think would help our systems connect better and help prepare our students. And we just want to be a good partner in terms of the community building that needs to happen between both systems to assure that our students get a warmer handoff between K through 12 and the community college.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists for discussing the report and kind of the changing landscape of reform in the state. So now I'd like to open it to audience questions. There's two PPIC staff members who have microphones. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. So we can start there.
Okay. Hi, I'm wondering, because success is not only measured by a student going to a 4-year university. Success can be measured by an AA degree, an industry-valued credential. So I'm wondering in the report, if some of those students didn't continue along the pathway because they didn't need to, is there anywhere to capture that kind of data?
So in this particular report, we focused on degree seeking, like associate degree seeking and transfer-oriented students, because our main outcome was the completion of the transfer level course, which is required to complete an associate's degree and transfer. But we know that there is like a population at the community college who their goal is just to build skills or maybe get a certificate where the transfer level course is not needed. But maybe our panel wants to speak to that population, maybe how these reforms or kind of how developmental education or reform efforts underway may impact them.
Well, I mean, one thing I would speak to that's starting to emerge as we get deeper into the guided pathways work is not just thinking about single kinds of course elements that satisfy the student's goals. And so, for instance, when you look at some of the careers that are required, some of the courses that are required for careers, say in the construction trades, a lot of colleges aren't really moving students through to for preparation in say geometry. And geometry is required for students who are seeking those careers. So I think some of our work needs to be around building flexibility for those goals, because even, you know, college composition, algebra, those are not singular kinds of one-size-fits-all gateways, and we need to become more sophisticated about the kinds of leveling that we do to support all of the things that you're talking about. I don't know if that really answered your question, but.
Yeah, I think too, like what we look at and what's looked at in this report is just the completion of that one class. And we're saying less than half of students are just completing just that entry-level composition course. We're not even talking about, are they finishing, are they transferring? That statistic alone is alarming. And so when you think how that must play out for those students beyond that, it's got to be far lower. So, you know, that entry-level composition class is required in a lot of different, not just for transfer, but I believe it's required also in a lot of CTE programs and things like that. So, it's not just looking at that alone, I think, tells us so much about the problems that we're facing.
Another question from the audience? Oh, up here. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Vish Moray, and I was president myself at the community colleges, and that was quite some time ago. And I am still involved in community college and education system. What you are doing is a fantastic things. Way back when I was there, we did common course numbering. And the most important thing we got to do is finance. We had $11 per unit fee at that time. Now you're talking $34, $35 a unit or something that nature. So my advice, what you are doing is fantastic, but I would like to go to the base. If a student is gotten the admission, we should have each community college a group of people, advisors, and those advisors should have to be very sensitive in all respect. Spend more time. What is the individual personal who is admitted in school? What are his issues? What are his problems? So I think you need to create a group of advisors very strongly upfront and find all the issues. And I think that will give you a complete understanding what are his problems, what is his family issue, or what other issues. And the community college, a lot of foreign students are coming, a lot of ideas that needs to be transferred. This is new country, new people. I came with nothing, but today I become the community college president at that time. And it can be done in this country. So I am happy with the help of the finance, budget, interaction, advisory positions, right people, getting right people to interact and talk, understand the issues and problems. And that must be a budgeted item to each community college. Create a group, and this is what you need to do. You will have better success and more success as you are suggesting. And I think with all that, and we can increase the attendance. Every dollar we reduce the tuition fee each year at that time, we increase 40,000 students. And that is a very important issue that needs to be done. And what this does, the community college is the most important key educational system in the country. Everybody accepting, but we got to see how we can do this, how we can get first-time students. Some of them in the family never have gone to school or colleges. And I think we have to give them second life and a chance, and it can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe Laura could talk a little bit about what the colleges are doing to kind of, I think it might have been embedded a little in the discussion, but maybe just bring out some of the kind of the advising, counseling, support systems that are there to help students.
Sure, advising and counseling are hugely important, especially right now as we talk about guided pathways and trying to provide students with, rather than that kind of only front-end support, typically students do engage in some kind of orientation, but often that ends up being kind of a dump of pamphlets and phone numbers, and students talk to us about the fact that they would like to see the same counselor, they need to see a counselor quicker. They want to understand more clearly the options that they have rather than, the more rudimentary kinds of interactions that they often have. And I think also, to your point, they want more deeply personal connections with the college, because it's that bond with the college that often is the difference between their success or their non-success. And so colleges are increasingly thinking about new ways to support students through both counseling and advising. There is a level of controversy in that discussion, though, I need to say, because in California, we tend to see counseling as one function and advising as a different function. In other states, that's kind of all considered advising. But I've certainly seen a lot of very promising practices in deploying paraprofessionals to provide the kind of support and success guidance that many students need through that personal interaction, counseling to really help navigate the educational terrain, and then faculty advisors to kind of help with the more sophisticated aspects of a major or an internship or an apprenticeship. But I think, again, the idea, I used the term before about the idea of a warm handoff, and I think what we're seeing more and more is colleges trying to figure out how they leverage their support for students as more of a network rather than individual discrete moments that are not necessarily strung together in a meaningful way. So that effort is part of Guided Pathways, and I think we're likely to see those practices amplified.
I think, too, it's helpful to train faculty in what resources are available. I think I hear so many faculty like, I didn't know we offered that, and I didn't know we had that. And faculty are the ones who see the students day in and day out and can pick up on those things that are happening. So the better informed our faculty are on campus about what we can offer to our students and how we can connect them to those resources, I think because we have the most interaction day to day, I think that would also help a lot as well.
And also, too, because they listen to their teachers more than they listen to anybody else.
There's a question back there.
First, I just wanted to appreciate that the sound level improved a few minutes ago. That was great. I noted the lack of equity in the chart showing the sort of stair-step differences between different ethnic groups or races. I wonder if there was any information from the studies that pinned down some of the issues that caused those differences.
So in our report, we definitely saw that we controlled for a variety of student characteristics. So race was one of them, age, whether the student was prior dual enrollee. So we saw, and still then we saw some of these differences emerge. And when we spoke to faculty, we did learn of some strategies that they're starting to adopt to help address equity, addressing some of the affective domains, students seeing themselves as learners, also making the curriculum more relevant to the students' lives, culturally relevant. So there are ways that the colleges are becoming aware of the equity gaps and are addressing it. But I know, like Laura said, sometimes colleges themselves, it's like an afterthought. Like you're teaching and you're not really seeing whether some students are doing better than others. So just becoming more aware on the ground as well. I don't know if you have other thoughts about why you may see these gaps emerge, besides kind of like, there's other issues going on in students' lives. And
I mean, I don't know if it's worth noting, but one of the things we saw at Mesa College in particular is they're starting to use tools to look at their course success and disaggregating the data within their own courses, where often you're going to see that departmental data or that course data looked at in the aggregate, and it can sometimes mask things that are going on. And so to look at that kind of instructor by instructor can help the department start to identify trends, how to leverage professional learning. It helps the faculty kind of see maybe some blind spots that they may have. And so I think that access to data is really helpful for the individual faculty members as well as the department. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, Summer.
Yeah,
I know you've seen that too.
Yeah, I believe youth college does that too, and they do this whole program where there's this community building among the faculty, because it's a sensitive topic, and to look at that, like you said, you may not even know, you might not have looked at that data to see it come out. So I think raising that awareness of even individually on the faculty level, what is happening in my own classroom, and some of the implicit biases that I might have that I'm not even aware of, that I can see when we disaggregate the data, but it has to be done in an environment where there's support, where the faculty,
Safe.
yeah, exactly.
Question?
Hi, my name is Alejandra Acosta. I'm a current graduate student at the University of Michigan and former advisor for high school students in San Jose. My question revolves around the implementation of Assembly Bill 705. I'm wondering what that will look like for students who have taken a break between high school and enrolling in the community college. I know that increasingly for the students that I worked with, financially, that going to any kind of college was really not an option for various reasons. So I'm wondering what multiple measures will look like if they've taken a break from school for various years, and for the increasing number of students who are adult students returning to school and looking for a degree.
I've worked with one college that has a really promising program, Miracosta. They use a guided self-placement process. So if you don't have a high school GPA, and again, they're only asking for self-reported, so you just put it in. They're not verifying with transcripts, just what the student reports on his or her application. If there's not a GPA, the student takes a survey on his or her reading and writing ability, and then they are given a recommended placement based on that, and then the student is allowed to look at all of the different options and choose which one fits him or her best. And to me, that's a very promising way, so that the student, it's not you just have to have that number, but you can assess your own skills. And I believe it actually converts it like to a GPA-like score. Like it's on a 4-point scale, so you end up with like a 3.5 on your self-assessment, and then that provides a recommendation. So to me, that's a promising technique that could be used for students without GPAs or with GPAs from long ago.
It's worth noting that the implementation team is looking at the MMAP data that really was the driver for a lot of the knowledge we have about the efficacy of high school grades. And I should acknowledge John Hetz, who's here, whose work was really foundational in that, who's also a member of the implementation team. And one of the things that the evidence suggests is that high school GPA has a shelf life of about 10 years. And so even if students take a break, we're still using high school GPA within that 10-year window. We are talking about, from a policy perspective, guided self-placement as one option. We are still discussing other possible opportunities, but we know we need to come up with a system that's going to maximize the placement of students who have taken a break. And even, I would also say, and John can speak to this if he'd like to, even though it's less predictive after 10 years, it's not that high school GPA is not predictive. Would you say that's a fair statement, John? Okay. I've been a very good student of John's for some time.
And I think one more thing I want to add is, if the choice is transfer level or transfer level with support, it's not as high stakes of a decision, right? If you're not saying you're going to go into 3 levels below. So if the worst case scenario is they have to take an extra unit or 2 with support in the same semester, I think that becomes less problematic. And that's where guided self-placement, I think, is so great, because if the choice, because I do worry if a student would self-select low, that would make me nervous as well. But I think if the choice is those 2, then it's not as high stakes of a decision.
You have a question?
I have a question about the role of technology in all of this and the testing into certain English programs. Obviously, if someone has access to a computer, they're doing their reports on Word or whatever in high school, where they have access to autocorrect or spell check, that kind of stuff. Is there a difference when they go to take an exam for placement and they're doing a handwritten type of assignment instead? Is that something that's being looked at, or something that in the future might be addressed as far as all that's concerned? Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can help me with your question a little bit more.
So when they're taking the test to get into the English classes, are they sitting in a classroom writing by hand, or are they writing on computer, that kind of stuff?
So most of the placement instruments that are used within the state are multiple choice, skills-based tests. They're not sitting and composing per se. But the question does come up. Some colleges, for instance, will allow students to use a calculator, and some students don't, and some students aren't allowed to. I think no matter how you look at it, if you look at the aggregate, what we see, in all placement exams that we've been able to gather data around, which there's just a few that colleges tend to favor, they're just not that predictive. And so no matter how you formulate a multiple choice question, if it's decontextualized and the skill is kind of isolated, it's hard for the student to really demonstrate their knowledge. And so the technology isn't as much of an issue as it is the way that the material is presented doesn't maximize the student's capacity to really show us what they know.
Hi, I'm Sandy Freed with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. First, I wanted to thank Assemblywoman Irwin and your staff, Ryan, for all your hard work on AB 705. It's going to make a huge difference. I also wanted to thank you for introducing AB 1935 this year to allow tutoring to be eligible for apportionment funding. I think that's going to be an important tool in our toolbox in this area. I actually had a question for the authors of the report. I'm wondering, for those colleges that you're seeing changing their sequencing, did you look at if they're changing their placement as well? Are they relying on tests still? Are they relying more on high school GPA or high school performance? And if you saw any correlation in those actions?
So we did. So part of the report actually takes a look at kind of the shift in enrollment in developmental English versus transfer level English. And we are seeing that among some of the colleges that are implementing some of these one semester acceleration strategies, they're also implementing more robust use of multiple measures. So we're seeing those increases in direct transfer level English placements or enrollments. So some of that is happening kind of concurrently. So that it is fairly common for colleges to adopt. I mean, assessment and placement is kind of like one of the critical kind of changes that need to happen, as has been highlighted. I think it's one of the roots of some of the inequities that we see. Students, when they assess and place using a placement test, for example, our students of color are more likely to place into remedial education, and they place into lower levels. So if you fix that by strengthening assessment and placement policies, and then you integrate it with some curricular reform, you're likely to get better outcomes overall for students. So we are seeing some of that for sure.
Okay. Well, this is probably a little bit out of your domain, but I just wanted to mention this because I do think that all the basic needs need to be dealt with, and I've had my students writing about their lives, and it's amazing that they're there. Yeah. But I do think that one really ignored issue, and it's even, in my opinion, ignored by the equity officers, is the content of the curriculum. It's so alienating to the students. They're like, what does this have to do with me? And I know that not everything has to be relevant to them, but it's so biased. A lot of times the standards are biased, the content is biased, and they just don't relate to it, and they don't feel welcome. So you could do all the things that you want to say, we welcome you on our campus, and they get to the classes and they're like, you're not talking about anything I can really relate to. Even if you remember Aaron Reich's Nickel and Dime book, I used that in my class, and they were like, they didn't get it. They didn't get it because it's like, this is our life. What is this book really about? So I think that really turns a lot of kids off who have potential, and they don't have the language, and the language that they're getting in the classes doesn't speak to them. So, and that's a bigger issue. I don't know how you, I do know how you deal with it, but I also know that the textbook companies and the academic fields are very resistant to changing that. So you got to do it slowly. And I know I've tried to do it. And I actually recently wrote a textbook that is trying to move the thing. But, then you have to, I do have a publisher, but I know that a lot of times you can't get them if you really shift your perspective. So I think that really needs, I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do to address that, legislatively or policy-wise or research-wise, but I think it's the biggest unidentified issue or doesn't get enough attention. So I just want to make that comment.
That a lot in the California Acceleration Project when we're training faculty who are teaching in these new contexts. And we have kind of 5 pedagogical principles that we train faculty to focus on in their classrooms, and one is relevant thinking-oriented curriculum. And so making it relevant to the students and also making it something that makes them think. And we advocate for using full-length nonfiction texts so that you have kind of a wider variety of text to choose from and working toward choosing things that are relevant for your students. So it's definitely something we're talking about in our own trainings. And we provide a lot of examples for faculty. We work with faculty across the state who share their curriculum. We have our packet's like 50 pages now of examples of different curriculum that faculty can share. So it's definitely, I agree with you completely, and it's something that's on our minds as well.
Thank you. Okay, one other question.
So I just wanted to say that the progress that has been made on this work with support from the legislature in the past and the work of the California Acceleration Project is truly remarkable. But we're still at a point where less than half of the colleges in this report have even implemented the slower acceleration. So, and a lot of colleges in the state are continuing to kind of take a wait and see approach. They're going by the kind of normal rhythm of the academic calendar, watching as things go through the curriculum committee. So I was wondering if each of you could take a moment to talk about the sense of urgency that you think, or what degree of urgency that you think the colleges should have in this work, both from what we know from the existing research and the perspective of the legislature and the Chancellor's office.
The sense of urgency.
Well, I can just, we really have the least control over it, I believe, but we do look at these numbers, and it is, I mean, it is a waste of human resource when you have that many children. And again, I look specifically in my district. I have Oxnard, 80% Latino, and you're talking about all these young people that have made this decision to take that first level class, have gone through the effort to register, and then they're put in a class that gives them very little opportunity for success. So for me, it is extremely urgent, but we are operating on the timeline of the colleges. So I think the main thing we can do is continue to follow up on the implementation and ask the questions and try to push along, but their timeline is not necessarily my timeline.
I think we very much agree that the sense of urgency is warranted. Partly, we think that will be communicated by guidance from our office in support of the legislation, which we know people are waiting for. We're also looking in May to take a lot of our more progressive colleges who are really interested in proliferating these practices and running a summit in May for colleges who are interested in starting to engage this work sooner rather than later, because a lot of times what helps people feel more comfortable is if they've got exemplars in their colleagues that they can use and experiment with. And even if they look at an example and say, well, we know we don't want to do that, at least it's something to start to shape what they do want to do. So I think we need to put the pedal to the metal, as they say, on that.
Great. I think, we've been working in CAP for 8 years trying to convince colleges, and as you said earlier, Laura, it's every college by itself trying to make, and that before AB 705, CAP is trying to convince every single department that it has its own set of politics and its own, faculty member who's going to sit in the back and say no, right? And so I think a lot of the stumbling blocks we've seen is that all of those colleges also think that they are unique and that they have to run a pilot at their school to make sure that this reform that has worked in several other states, statewide, is going to work on their specific campus. And I think that's really the power of AB 705, because now it is going to have to happen. And we can't run pilots anymore. As Katie Hearn says, the world is round. We know the data is there, right? It's time to stop running these pilots. And we've done some work with the Accelerated Learning Project in Baltimore, and Peter Adams, who runs that, has this really powerful slide because they started kind of the co-requisite movement and it took them years to scale. I believe it's something like 10 years. And he puts up this slide and it's 35 Southwest airplanes. And he says, this is how many students would have passed transfer level had we scaled 10 years ago. And that is heartbreaking to me. We know these practices work, yet for so long colleges have wanted to make sure and run small scale pilots with co-requisites, with multiple measures for placement. I hear every college wants to run a pilot, and that's why I'm so hopeful with AB 705, because it finally seems like this is going to happen on a larger scale.
Well, thank you so much for the panel. Joining me in thanking the panel, Marisol and Hans, for the presentations. We'll be hanging out for a few minutes if you have any additional questions of the panelists or the researchers. But yeah, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys in future PPIC Higher Ed events. Thank you.